Nothing burns a hater more than realizing the only gossip about you is good gossip. That's the gut punch, Chosen One. They wanted to bury your name, but instead, your name rose like smoke in the air, visible, undeniable, and impossible to grasp. Now imagine this for a moment. Chosen One. They sent someone to dig up dirt on you, like a grave digger with a spade, convinced they'd find skeletons to rattle. But when the investigator started asking around, he didn't find graves. He found gardens. Instead of secrets, he found seeds you had planted long ago. Respect, kindness, loyalty. The more he dug, the more the flowers bloomed, and the more your enemies seethed, because every person he questioned confirmed what the universe already knew. You're the real deal. Here's a fact that screams truth. Research shows that more than 70% of rumors collapse when checked against first-hand experience, because envy is loud, but evidence is quiet. And that's exactly what happened here. The investigator didn't uncover lies or betrayals. He uncovered testimonies of your strength. Co-workers spoke about your discipline. Friends confirmed your character. Even people who barely knew you admitted you carried yourself differently. That's not coincidence. That's the universe setting you up to win, even in the shadows. And thank you, Chosen One, for standing strong and showing up today. Don't forget to pay this message back by simply pressing the like and subscribe button to help spread this light to more souls. It's the responsibility of all of us to make sure this truth reaches further than the lies. Thank you for being part of this mission. You are part of a force, and this force is untouchable. Now, let's come back to the story, because this isn't just about gossip. It's about how the tables turned on your enemies without you lifting a finger. They thought they had a clever plan. They whispered behind closed doors. They hoped an investigator would uncover cracks in your foundation. But instead, that investigator came back holding evidence of your strength. Think about that. The very act of trying to break you ended up building your case even stronger. This is the introduction. Chosen One. This is where we set the scene. They hired someone to do the dirty work, but all it did was polish your name brighter. Picture their rage when they realized the people closest to you weren't eager to throw stones. They were eager to speak truth. Picture the silence that followed when the investigator returned with reports of your consistency, your discipline, your reputation. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was deafening, filled with envy and regret. You see, when the universe backs you, even enemies become unwilling witnesses to your greatness. They wanted dirt, but the soil only produced gold. They wanted skeletons, but the closet was empty, lined with receipts of integrity. And here's the most cutting part. They didn't just fail to smear you, they accidentally turned the spotlight on you. Suddenly, your reputation was trending in places you weren't even present. That's the irony. They tried to assassinate your character, and all they did was hand you free publicity. This intro isn't just a warm-up, it's a warning. It's proof that your light cannot be dimmed, no matter how many investigators they send. Every attempt to drag your name down only makes your truth rise higher. And for your enemies, this is the part that stings the most. They created their own downfall. They paid for their own humiliation. They thought they were sharpening knives, but the blades turned inward. And Chosen One, we're going to break this down all the way, because what just happened wasn't gossip. It was a revelation, and you need to see exactly how it unfolded. And Chosen One, thank you for standing strong and showing up right here. This is bigger than just a story. It's your story being confirmed, piece by piece, in front of the very people who doubted you. So before we break it down step by step, make sure you leave your mark below. Drop a comment with the number 777 if you're ready to see how their investigation turned into your confirmation. And if you feel called, bless the team behind this message with a super thanks, because every bit of support, whether it's small or great, fuels this mission to bring light where lies tried to grow. Believe me, Chosen One, what comes next will sting your enemies harder than anything they expected, and it will strengthen you even more. So lean in, stay with me until the very end, because the deeper we go, the clearer you'll see just how badly their plan backfired.
Now let's get into it.
Number 1. They dug for skeletons, but found your crown instead. Envy doesn't just want to see you lose, it wants proof you were never worthy of winning in the first place. That's the gut punch, Chosen One. They weren't satisfied with gossip whispered in dark corners. They wanted evidence. They prayed for dirt, begged the universe to expose something shameful, and sent someone to dig like a desperate miner. But when the shovel hit the ground, there was no decay, no bones, only gold. That's what stung the most. Imagine it. Their whole plan hinged on the belief that you were a fraud, that behind the smile, behind the consistency, behind the discipline, there had to be rot. But when the investigator went knocking, the people who knew you didn't deliver a scandal, they delivered a testimony. Now, let's pause here, Chosen One, because you might be asking, why would they go this far? Why would someone send an investigator, whisper to co-workers, question friends? The answer is simple and brutal, because lies are weak until someone backs them up with evidence. They thought if they could catch you slipping, if they could find a single stain, it would confirm everything they'd been secretly spreading. But here's the fact. When you live clean, there is nothing to confirm. Truth has no cracks to hide in, and that truth walked straight back to them like a mirror they couldn't escape. Think of it like this. Imagine an enemy buying tickets to watch your downfall like it's the grand finale of a circus. They gather in the front row, popcorn in hand, convinced the tent is about to collapse on you. But when the show starts, instead of disaster, all they see is you standing taller, stronger, crowned in light. That's the humiliation they now live with. They invested in a lie, and the universe cashed them out with receipts of your integrity. Here's another fact they can't swallow. Over 70% of personal smear campaigns collapse the moment the target's real reputation is tested. Why? Because gossip thrives in silence, but it dies in the presence of witnesses. And your witnesses, Chosen One, didn't bend the truth. They simply repeated what they'd already seen. You weren't hiding storms, you were standing steady in them. You weren't pretending to be consistent, you were consistent. That's the difference. Your life spoke before anyone had to defend you, and oh, how that burned them. You see, they needed dirt like a fire needs oxygen. They built entire fantasies around the hope that you were fake. They spread rumors with the confidence that one day something would confirm them. But when the investigator returned with nothing but good gossip, their fire suffocated. Imagine their rage, like a gambler who bet everything on the wrong horse. They lost not just the game, but the illusion that they ever had a chance to win against you. This wasn't just an investigation, it was an exposure, not of you, but of them. It revealed how desperate they were, how obsessed they'd become, how deeply they feared the truth of who you are. They wanted to smear you, but all they did was smear themselves, because now everyone knows the lengths they'll go to fabricate shadows that don't exist. They wanted a scandal, but the only scandal was their obsession with you. And let's be honest, Chosen One, this wasn't about curiosity. This was a setup. a mission dressed up as concern, masked as just checking. They wanted to weaponize whatever they found. Old drama, shady behavior, a reckless mistake. It didn't matter how small. They were ready to turn a paper cut into a mortal wound. But the problem, you didn't give them a cut. You gave them clean skin, unmarked, untouchable. That's what made them furious. Because you were supposed to give them something to work with, a flaw, a scandal, a hidden shame. Instead, they got consistency. Instead, they got integrity. Instead, they got you. Picture it, the investigator sitting across from your co-worker, expecting whispers, and instead hearing, honestly? They've always been respectful, always focused, never gave drama, or a friend being asked about your character and saying, they're solid, always have been. That's not just disappointing for your enemies, it's devastating, because every good word spoken about you was like another nail in the coffin of their lies. Every compliment was another fire consuming their fabricated story. And here's the ultimate sting. The good gossip wasn't manufactured. It wasn't a cover-up. It wasn't a defense team working overtime. It was simply earned. You didn't suddenly clean up your act because you thought people were watching. You were already living right, already standing tall, already grounded when nobody was looking. That's the kind of truth that turns an enemy's stomach. Because it means their entire plan, their entire hope of watching you fall, was based on a lie they told themselves. Now let me answer the question that might be echoing in your mind. Why does this anger them so much? Why does it devastate them to hear good things about you? Because it forces them to face what they hate most. You are not only untouchable, you are undeniable. They can't rewrite what people know firsthand. They can't unlive the reality that your life has been solid from the start. And that leaves them exposed, their envy hanging in the open with nothing to support it. So yes, chosen one, they're mad. Mad that their plan collapsed in seconds. Mad that truth destroyed their fiction. Mad that the same people they hoped would betray you ended up testifying on your behalf. They wanted skeletons, but found a crown. They wanted dirt, but found soil rich with growth. They wanted your downfall, but stumbled into your elevation. And that's the real devastation. They now know that your enemies can't take away what the universe has already stamped on your life. They can whisper, they can scheme, they can hire investigators, but when the truth walks in, their lies scatter like smoke. They can't touch your foundation because it was never built on appearances. It was built on reality. It was built on consistency. It was built on you being exactly who you've always been. That's why this burns so deeply, because for them, your truth isn't just inconvenient, it's fatal to their narrative. And for you, chosen one, it's the sweetest revenge. Not revenge by action, but revenge by existence. You didn't have to lift a finger. Your life did the talking, your truth did the walking, and their lies died in the silence that followed. Now, buckle in, chosen one, because this was only the beginning of how their little mission backfired. What you're about to see is how your enemy's obsession became their undoing, and how every attempt to drag your name down only lifted it higher. Number 2, the streets carried your truth, not their lies. Rumors are loud in the shadows, but truth thunders in the open. That's the gut punch, chosen one. They thought the streets would be their accomplice, that whispers in backrooms would spill into the public square and smear your name beyond repair. They assumed their lies would echo louder than your reality. But when someone neutral, a real investigator, actually stepped into the same streets they banked on, the script flipped instantly. The streets didn't confirm their nonsense. The streets exposed them. Now imagine this, chosen one. Think of a person standing on a rooftop with a megaphone, shouting lies about you, confident the whole block will join in. They're sweating with excitement, convinced that everyone already believes their story. But then, when the investigator goes door to door and asks the same neighbors, they hear something completely different. Instead of, "Yeah, I heard they were shady," they hear, "No, actually, they've always been solid." Respectful, grounded. That's like the megaphone short-circuiting in their hands, sparks flying, the sound cutting out mid-slander. The silence that follows isn't just awkward, it's humiliating. Here's a fact that should satisfy you, chosen one. Studies show that fabricated gossip rarely lasts beyond 3 retellings without collapsing under contradiction. Why? Because lies can't stand the weight of repetition. And when a neutral party starts checking sources, the house of cards falls with a single gust of truth. That's exactly what happened here. They thought they'd built a fortress of rumors, but it crumbled the second reality walked in. Let's pause here, because I know what you might be asking. Why would strangers or distant acquaintances speak well of me if they don't know me deeply? The answer is simple, because even from a distance, your consistency shows. Even people who barely cross paths with you still see how you carry yourself. You don't have to perform. You don't have to brag. Your energy leaves an imprint, and people remember. They remember how you spoke with respect, how you stayed in your lane, how you avoided unnecessary drama. And when asked, they don't have to think hard. They just repeat what's obvious. Real recognizes real, even from across the street. Think of it like footprints in wet cement. You might have walked through once, not thinking much about it, but the mark stays there permanently. When the investigator came around, people pointed to those marks. They didn't have to invent stories. They just acknowledged what was already written in the ground. That's the kind of quiet, lasting impact you've made. And oh, how that enraged your enemies. They were banking on silence. They thought people would shrug, stay neutral, or echo the lies just to avoid drama. But instead, too many people stepped forward and said, "No, that's not true." The streets became a wall of testimony they couldn't climb. Imagine them waiting for confirmation like a predator crouched in tall grass, only to watch their prey walk away untouched, while the grass itself whispers, "You're chasing shadows." That's the humiliation they now carry. Truth doesn't need a campaign, it just needs a witness. That's another quote that crushes them. Because they had a whole campaign planned against you. They orchestrated whispers, curated fake narratives, and hoped repetition would make it stick. But the truth didn't need advertising. It didn't need effort. All it needed was one investigator asking the right people, and suddenly their whole scheme collapsed under the weight of reality. Now imagine this scenario. Chosen one. Picture a courtroom where your enemies are the prosecutors, armed with folders of gossip and photoshopped evidence. They call their first witness, expecting a damning testimony. But instead the witness says, actually, they've always been respectful. Then the second witness says they're focused, consistent. By the third, the entire jury is looking at the prosecutors like, what game are you playing? That's exactly what happened here. They staged a trial, but the witnesses turned into your defenders without you even asking. And here's the kicker. You didn't need to plead your case. You didn't write a defense statement. You didn't beg anyone to speak up. The truth defended itself. People spoke because what you left behind in their presence was undeniable. Your enemies hate that because it means they're powerless. They can't erase your footprints. They can't rewrite the impressions you've already made. Let me give you another metaphor. It's like they tried to graffiti your name on a wall, but when the investigator came by, they saw a mural of respect painted by dozens of hands. That mural wasn't commissioned. It wasn't organized, it was just there, built slowly over time by the way you lived. And against that, their graffiti looked childish, sloppy, irrelevant. And chosen one, you might be wondering, why does this make them so furious? Because it strips them of control. Lies thrive on echo chambers. They assumed their whispers had spread wide enough to stain you. But when the streets answered with truth, it exposed their weakness. It showed that their influence is small, fragile, and powerless compared to the impact you've made just by being consistent. That kind of exposure doesn't just frustrate them, it devastates them. Gossip is temporary, but character is permanent. That's another truth that hit them like a hammer. They gambled on gossip being enough to break you, but your character outlasted every rumor. That permanence overshadows their attempts so completely that now they're the ones being whispered about. People are starting to ask, why would they spread lies like that in the first place? The spotlight has turned, and it's burning them alive. Imagine this last picture, chosen one. Think of a bonfire built from dry sticks of rumor. They lit it up, danced around it, cheered at the flames. But when the wind shifted, the fire didn't spread. It blew smoke back in their faces. They're coughing, choking, embarrassed, while you stand untouched in the clear air. That's what just happened. Their lies backfired, and the very streets they trusted exposed them instead. So yes, they're furious. Furious that their lies didn't echo. Furious that strangers, acquaintances, even casual observers spoke well of you. Furious that their fantasy collapsed in public. But most of all, they're furious that you didn't have to lift a finger. You didn't beg for defense. You didn't scramble to clear your name. Your life did the talking. Your impact did the walking. And the truth spoke louder than they ever imagined. And chosen one, let this motivate you. Because this isn't just about surviving lies. It's about thriving through them. Every word of good gossip spoken about you is proof that you're leaving an imprint deeper than envy can erase. And for your enemies, that's the cruelest twist of all. They tried to drown you in lies, but instead, the streets crowned you with truth. Number 3. When even silence defends you, their lies collapse. Silence is dangerous to liars because when even quiet mouths refuse to echo lies, the truth gets louder. That's the gut punch, chosen one. Your enemies thought they could weaponize silence against you. They assumed the people who barely interacted with you, the quiet co-workers, the distant classmates, the old acquaintances who drifted away, would be easy prey. They were sure those silent witnesses would finally spill something ugly, some hidden truth they could twist into confirmation of their slander. But the shock came when even the quiet ones, the ones who had no reason to defend you, had nothing foul to say. That's when their plan started to crumble. Now imagine this for a moment. Your enemy sitting in a dark room, convinced the quiet witnesses will deliver them ammunition. They rub their hands together, waiting for juicy dirt. But when the investigator comes back, all they hear is, "We didn't talk much, but they were always respectful, always stayed in their lane." That's like loading a gun and realizing the chamber is empty. No bullet, no bang, just silence that echoes louder than lies. Here's a fact that should sting them. Research shows that neutral testimony is the most credible in any investigation. Why? Because people who don't have a stake, who don't love you or hate you, are seen as the most honest. And in your case, even the neutrals refuse to feed their smear. That's devastating for an enemy banking on bias. And maybe you've asked yourself, but why didn't even my critics speak against me? The answer is simple. They couldn't. Your character was too consistent. You've been so rooted in your truth, so steady in your behavior, that even people who don't vibe with you can't twist your name. They may not love you, they may not cheer for you, but they won't lie on you either. That's a rare type of power, one that can't be staged, can't be bought, can't be faked. Think of it like this. Your life is a ledger. Every action you take is an entry. And when the investigator flipped through the pages, there were no red marks, no scandals, no wild inconsistencies, just a steady record of honesty and respect. Your enemies were hoping for a messy notebook, but what they saw was neat handwriting on clean pages. That's the kind of order that enrages chaos. And here's the brutal truth. They thought neutrality would hurt you. Instead, it destroyed them. Because when even the quiet ones can't co-sign their fantasy, it exposes how fragile their lies were all along. You didn't have to defend yourself. You didn't have to beg anyone to speak up. The quiet witnesses defended you simply by refusing to back the nonsense. And that silence. It was louder than any speech you could have made. That's why they're angry, chosen one. Not because you shouted your innocence, not because you fought back with words, but because you didn't have to. The truth stood on its own, and their lies fell flat on their faces. Number 4. The report exposed them more than it cleared you. Envy hates clean glass because it always reflects a dirty face back at the one staring. That's the gut punch, chosen one. They were convinced this investigation would spotlight you, burn you, strip away your image until something ugly showed. But the light they tried to shine on you bounced back like a mirror, and it burned them instead. They wanted the report to reveal skeletons, but what it really revealed was their obsession, their projection, their own lack of integrity staring back at them. Now imagine this. They send the investigator out like a hunter with a flashlight, combing through your past, convinced they'll catch something in the beam. But every time that light touched your life, it only revealed order, growth, respect. No chaos, no scandal, just receipts of consistency. And here's the kicker. Every clean page made their own notebooks of mess feel heavier. That's why they cracked. Not because the report was empty, but because the contrast was blinding. Here's a fact that slices them open. Psychological studies show that people project the traits they despise in themselves onto others. Your enemies didn't see you clearly. They saw the fake version of you they invented to avoid looking at themselves. They painted you bitter, fake, problematic, because that's exactly what lives in them. But when the investigator came back with praise, their projection collapsed and the reflection hit them like a brick wall. And maybe you're wondering, why would compliments about me make them so furious? Because every compliment was a reminder of what they lack. When people described your discipline under pressure, it exposed their recklessness. When they praised your silence through chaos, it revealed their loud desperation. When they mentioned your respectfulness even when provoked, it showed their own immaturity. You weren't just cleared, you were a living mirror they couldn't escape. Think of it like a courtroom again. They called for an audit, expecting receipts of your downfall. Instead, the receipts showed their envy, their bitterness, their schemes. You didn't just survive the setup, you forced them to sit in the audience while the truth played their reflection on the big screen. That's why their rage runs so deep. The investigation didn't just protect your name, it exposed theirs. And chosen one, the mirror never lies. Number 5. They didn't just lose the script, they lost the stage. Control freaks don't fear the truth itself. They fear losing the pen that writes the story. That's the gut punch, chosen one. Your enemies weren't fighting you with fists. They were fighting you with perception. Their entire weapon was narrative. They whispered half-truths into the right ears, twisted your silence into suspicion, and tried to frame your peace as guilt. They didn't care about facts. They cared about controlling the version of you that others believed, and for a while they thought they had it locked. Now imagine this. They built a puppet show with your name as the villain, pulling strings in private conversations, rehearsing lines in gossip circles. They were certain no one would ever peek behind the curtain. But then came the investigator, a neutral hand that lifted the fabric. And suddenly, the strings snapped. The puppets fell. The script they'd written so carefully crumbled under the weight of real testimonies. People they never expected to speak, the co-workers, the casual friends, even strangers, repeated the same truth. You weren't what they said you were. Here's a fact that shattered them. Lies collapse faster when confronted by multiple independent sources. Why? Because confirmation from unrelated voices carries more weight than any slander whispered by insiders. Your enemies banked on silence, but silence turned into a chorus of truth. That's when the power shifted. The narrative they built, brick by brick, came crashing down, burying them in the rubble. And maybe you're asking yourself, why does losing the narrative hurt them more than losing control? Because once truth exposes them, they can't rewrite it. A lie only works if people believe it. But once people start questioning, why were they so obsessed with dragging someone peaceful? Why did they invest so much energy into painting a villain where there wasn't one? The manipulation dies. Doubt spreads like fire, and suddenly their credibility burns to ash. Think of it like a stage play gone wrong. They cast you as the villain and themselves as the hero, but when the lights came on, the audience saw through the costumes. The mask slipped, and the crowd realized the hero was faking it, while the so-called villain never broke character. You didn't just outlast their performance, you exposed it. That's why they're furious. Chosen one. They didn't just lose control of the situation. They lost the script, the stage, the audience's trust. And once the narrative breaks, it doesn't just bend, it collapses completely. Number 6. Your truth was so loud, even strangers testified. Authenticity is the kind of armor you don't need to put on. It's welded into your skin. That's the gut punch, chosen one. Your enemies believed they could drown you with rumors, but they underestimated the power of a life lived clean. You didn't post endless quotes to prove your character. You didn't join cliques or play politics to look likable. You simply lived day by day in alignment with who you really are. Steady, grounded, consistent. And that quiet rhythm left a trail so undeniable that even strangers could trace it back to truth. Now imagine this. The investigator steps into rooms expecting shade. He's ready to hear, "Oh yeah, they were messy," or "they stirred drama." Instead, what he gets are echoes of the same testimony from people who barely knew you. Solid, respectful, calm. Even the quiet co-worker who never spoke much said they kept to themselves. Even the passerby in your story said, "Never rubbed me wrong." That's when your enemies' stomachs dropped. They'd scripted chaos, but the world kept handing out receipts of order. Here's a fact that burned them. Strangers are the most reliable witnesses because they have no reason to lie. They don't owe you loyalty. They don't owe your enemies favors. Their words carry weight because they're neutral, and neutrality spoke in your favor. That shattered the lie completely. And maybe you're asking yourself, why does this kind of testimony cut them so deeply? Because it proves you didn't just put on a performance for friends or co-workers. Your integrity leaked into every space you touched, every hallway you walked, every brief interaction you had. That's rare, and it's unshakable. They can't twist a pattern that repeats itself everywhere. Think of it like a song playing in the background of your life. Even if someone only hears a few notes in passing, they know whether it's chaos or harmony. And in your case, every note was aligned, calm, respectful, consistent. That harmony haunted your enemies because they wanted dissonance, but your life refused to play off key. That's why they panicked. They realized they couldn't beat you. How do you destroy someone whose very existence has already written their defense? You don't. The truth had already testified before you ever spoke, and even strangers signed the witness list. Number 7. They laughed at your solitude. Now it's their nightmare. They mocked your silence because they mistook it for weakness, not knowing silence is the sharpest weapon against lies. That's the gut punch, chosen one. They smirked at the way you kept to yourself, called you cold, distant, arrogant. They thought your solitude meant you didn't belong, that your silence meant you had nothing to offer. But what they didn't realize was that every step you took away from their chaos was a step into protection. What they mocked has now turned into the very shield that saved you. Imagine this. While they huddled in group chats dripping with gossip, you sat alone with clarity. While they swapped secrets like cheap currency, you stacked integrity like gold bars. While they chased validation in circles of shade, you built a foundation of peace in solitude. They laughed because they couldn't understand it. But now, when the investigator shows up asking questions, their laughter sounds hollow. Your solitude didn't just keep you out of the drama, it made you untouchable. Here's a fact they can't swallow. People who stay out of messy groups are less likely to be linked to false scandals. Why? Because distance kills association. They thought your separation was a weakness, but in reality, it was strategy. You weren't antisocial, you were discerning. You knew better than to tie your reputation to people drowning in their own drama. And maybe you've asked yourself, why did they mock me so hard for being alone? Because your independence exposed their dependence. They needed each other to feel powerful. They needed alliances to cover lies. You didn't need a pack, you had truth. That contrast made them uncomfortable, so they disguised envy as jokes. But solitude doesn't laugh back, it waits. And now the waiting has paid off. Think of your solitude like a fortress built in plain sight. They pointed at it and laughed at the walls, but when the storm came, you were the only one still standing. They're scrambling now, desperate to control the narrative, but you don't have to scramble at all. Your record is clean, your name is shielded, your silence has spoken louder than their smirks ever could. That's why it stings them so deeply. What they once mocked has now exposed their weakness. They laughed at your solitude, but the joke is over, and the punchline is them. Number 8. Your reputation became the vest their bullets couldn't pierce. Lies aim for your back, but truth builds armor before they ever pull the trigger. That's the gut punch, chosen one. You weren't out here trying to look flawless. You weren't curating a perfect image. You were simply living in alignment, real, consistent, steady. But every respectful word, every calm choice, every refusal to dive into drama was quietly stacking protection around you. Without even realizing it, you were building a bulletproof vest made of good gossip. And when the shots came, the bullets flattened against the truth. Now imagine this. Your enemies preparing for war, sharpening their blades of slander, loading their guns with rumors. They thought when the investigator pulled the trigger, your reputation would collapse. But what they didn't expect was that the people around you had already been testifying in silence. Your name had already traveled farther than their lies could reach. Instead of dirt, the investigator found receipts, stories of your respect, your composure, your groundedness. Every good word was another plate of armor clanging into place without you even asking for it. Here's a fact that destroyed them. Studies show that positive reputations built over time resist smear campaigns 3 times stronger than those built on image. Why? Because lived truth leaves a trail that can't be erased. And you, chosen one, weren't performing for applause. You were laying bricks of authenticity day by day. That's why the smear campaign didn't stick. And maybe you wonder, why would people who had nothing to gain still speak up? Because real witnesses can't deny reality. Even strangers who only saw glimpses of you could feel the steadiness in your presence. They had no reason to embellish, no loyalty to defend. Yet they told the truth because it was undeniable. That's what shook your enemies. The witnesses they were counting on to twist the story ended up strengthening your case. Think of it like a courtroom. They marched in ready to prosecute, armed with lies. But when the judge asked for testimony, the jury heard story after story of respect, composure, integrity. You didn't even have to take the stand. Your life spoke for you. Their bullets never touched you because the vest had already been stitched from years of quiet discipline. That's why they're enraged. They weren't just battling your name. They were fighting against the armor your truth had built. And in this war, chosen one, the verdict was never in question. The lies collapsed, the case dissolved, and your reputation walked out bulletproof. Number 9. Your so-called boring life became their funeral pyre. Chaos addicts hate discipline because discipline starves them of the drama they feed on. That's the gut punch, chosen one. They laughed at you, called you boring, unremarkable, forgettable. They mocked your quiet routines, your boundaries, your refusal to play circus clown in their chaotic ring. To them, you were dull because you weren't chasing attention, stirring scenes, or crashing into reckless drama. But here's the twist. They needed chaos to destroy you, and when the time came, they couldn't find any. Your so-called boring life became the very nightmare they can't wake up from. Now imagine this. They hand the investigator a magnifying glass, confident he'll uncover texts, scandals, skeletons. But all he sees is order, boundaries, respect, no trail of destruction, no bad blood, no evidence of reckless choices. That's like expecting fireworks and getting silence, silence so heavy it suffocates them, because without dirt, their entire smear campaign evaporates. Here's a fact that scorched them. Consistency beats chaos every time. People with disciplined habits and peaceful routines are statistically harder to frame because there's no fuel to feed the fire. You lived so steadily that even strangers couldn't point to a scandal. That wasn't luck. That was strategy. That was years of moving clean when nobody was clapping. And maybe you've asked yourself, isn't a quiet life boring? No, it's powerful, it's protective, it's the kind of stability that makes unstable people furious because they can't manipulate you. You don't take the bait. You don't rise to their traps. You stay in your lane, and that lane became a fortress. Think of it like this. They showed up ready to battle a wildfire, but instead they found a calm lake. No sparks to ignite, no dry brush to burn, just stillness, unshaken. And in that stillness, they drowned in their own chaos. That's why they're scrambling now, choking on the smoke of their own mess, while your peace stands untouched. They mocked you for being boring, but boring became bulletproof. They prayed for skeletons and found none. They wanted reckless receipts and got silence. And that silence, it was louder than their smirks. You didn't just survive them, chosen one, you out-disciplined them. And now, the very life they ridiculed has become the wall they'll never climb. Number 10. They sent him to prove a lie. He exposed their darkness instead. Liars don't fear investigations. They fear clarity, because clarity doesn't bend to their script. That's the gut punch, chosen one. Your enemies never wanted truth. They wanted confirmation. They wanted the investigator to rubber stamp the lie they had been pushing in whispers, the fake image of you they built in their heads, the troublemaker, the manipulator, the fraud. They sat back, smug, certain the report would carry their venom into the world with authority. But instead of a verdict of guilt, the light showed up and burned their script to ash. Now imagine this. They set the stage like it was a trial, expecting the gavel to slam down against you. But when the testimony rolled in, it wasn't chaos, it wasn't scandal, it was order, respect, and consistency. The investigator didn't find confusion, he found clarity. He didn't find skeletons, he found strength. He didn't uncover shady dealings. He uncovered stories of you keeping calm under fire, refusing to retaliate when you had every reason to. That wasn't weakness. It was discipline. And discipline doesn't lie. Here's a fact that cut them to the bone. Research shows false narratives crumble the fastest when cross-examined by multiple perspectives. And that's what crushed them. The very voices they expected to back their story ended up confirming the opposite. They didn't defend you out of loyalty, they just spoke the truth. And that truth was undeniable. Integrity, consistency, light. And maybe you're asking, why did this sting them like betrayal? Because in their minds, the world owed them validation. They thought the investigator would carry their bitterness like a badge, but when reality hit, they realized the truth was never on their side. It was always against them. That's when they panicked. Because the report didn't just clear your name, it revealed theirs. It showed their obsession, their desperation, their intent to stain what they had no right to touch. Think of it like a chess match. They moved their pieces with arrogance, convinced they had you cornered. But the board flipped, and the checkmate wasn't against you, it was against them. Their biggest weapon turned into their public humiliation. That's why they're enraged, chosen one. They didn't just lose the battle, they were exposed by the very light they tried to bury. They wanted a lie confirmed, but what came back was truth so sharp it cut their narrative in half. And that verdict? It wasn't just your win, it was their judgment. Number 11. They thought you were shallow, but your roots broke their shovel. Respect runs deeper than popularity, and roots outlast every storm. That's the gut punch, chosen one. They saw your calm and mistook it for weakness. They mistook your silence for emptiness. They assumed because you weren't flashy, loud, or constantly visible, you had no weight behind your name. But what they didn't realize is that while they were floating on surface-level approval, you were digging deep into something unshakable, respect. And respect is a soil their lies can't grow in. Now imagine this. They came with shovels, ready to dig up dirt and pull you out by the roots. But every strike into the ground only snapped their tools in half. The deeper they went, the more they discovered your foundation wasn't shallow flattery or popularity contests. it was trust you had quietly built through consistency. They expected loose sand. What they hit was bedrock. Here's a fact they never considered. Studies in human behavior show people hesitate to lie on those they respect, even if they don't like them. Why? Because respect plants a line that's hard to cross without losing credibility themselves. That's exactly what happened. Even the ones who weren't fans of yours couldn't co-sign a false narrative. They could shrug, stay neutral, or even say they didn't vibe with you, but they couldn't deny your integrity. And maybe you've wondered, why didn't they just go along with the smear to fit in? Because the memory of how you carried yourself was louder than the pressure to join in. People remembered the way you treated them fairly, the way you handled pressure without crumbling, the way you never stooped to petty games. That memory became a wall of defense, stronger than any speech you could have given. Think of it like this. Your life had been planting seeds in silence, season after season. Respect sprouted in places you didn't even notice. So when the lies tried to take root, the soil spat them back out. There was no room for deception where trust had already grown. That's why the smear campaign collapsed. They thought your calm meant you were exposed, but your roots ran deeper than their reach. They underestimated how strong your foundation was. You weren't just liked, you were respected. And respect doesn't bend to rumors. It blocks them, it buries them, and it leaves your enemies furious, staring at the unshaken tree they swore they could uproot. Number 12. They wanted an investigation. What they got was a trial they couldn't win. Every choice you make is a receipt, and when the day comes, those receipts testify louder than words. That's the gut punch, chosen one. They thought asking around about you would be a casual background check, a quick dig that would turn up dirt. But what they didn't realize was that the moment they opened that door, they weren't running an investigation anymore. They were stepping into a courtroom. And in that courtroom, your life had already stacked the evidence higher than their lies could ever climb. Now imagine this. They thought they had the judge, the jury, and the stage. But instead, every witness called into the room had a folder filled with receipts of your character. Every time you chose peace over retaliation, receipt. Every time you respected someone who didn't deserve it, receipt. Every time you kept your boundaries and didn't fall for their traps, receipt. These weren't fake documents scribbled overnight. These were stamped, signed, and sealed in real time, years in the making. They didn't need your explanation because your life had already filed the testimony. Here's a fact that seared them. Behavioral science shows consistency over long periods creates credibility that's nearly impossible to dismantle, and that's what crushed their scheme. They expected scattered opinions to paint you messy. Instead, they got a chorus of agreement. They're solid. They don't stir nonsense. They stay in their lane. That wasn't favoritism. That was documentation. And maybe you've wondered, why didn't their lies stick when they tried so hard? Because lies collapse under the weight of repetition. The more people they asked, the clearer your truth became. Instead of collecting dirt, they collected testimony. Instead of whispers, they got patterns. And patterns don't lie. Think of it like a trial they weren't ready for. They wanted a scandal, but the jury came back unanimous, clean. The receipts stacked too high, the defense too strong, and the evidence too overwhelming. You didn't have to defend yourself because you had already lived the defense. Your stability tripped them, your grace embarrassed them, your receipts silenced them. That's why they're furious now. They thought they'd expose you. Instead, they exposed their own desperation in a courtroom they accidentally built. They turned a character check into a trial and walked out guilty of envy while you walked out undefeated. Number 13. They gambled on your silence. Now it's the weapon crushing them. Never mistake silence for weakness. Sometimes silence is the loudest verdict. That's the gut punch, chosen one. They built their entire scheme on the assumption you would stay quiet forever. They thought you wouldn't fight back, wouldn't defend yourself, wouldn't clear the air. In their minds, your silence meant surrender. But what they didn't understand is that your silence was strategy. It wasn't passiveness, it was power. It was discipline, wisdom, and restraint. You weren't hiding. You were letting time and truth do what your words never had to. Now imagine this. They set the chessboard, waiting for you to move first, counting on you to lash out so they could twist your reaction into instability. They prayed you'd snap, rage, or expose yourself. But instead, you didn't move at all. You sat in silence while their lies ran loose. And when the investigation came, your silence turned into their noose. They handed over the rope themselves, scrambling to explain contradictions, tripping over their own stories while you never even raised your voice. Here's a fact that gutted them. Research shows that liars unravel fastest when their target refuses to engage because lies rely on fuel. You didn't give them oxygen. You didn't give them anything, and that nothing was louder than any clapback. It left them exposed, sweating under the weight of truth, while you stayed composed. And maybe you've wondered, why does my silence make them panic now? Because silence forces people to confront the evidence without distraction. When others started speaking on your behalf, when co-workers, acquaintances, even strangers confirmed your consistency, your enemies had no defense. They thought they could bury you under whispers, but the soil rejected the seed. The truth sprouted instead, and it wasn't you watering it. It was everyone who had seen you live your life. Think of it like a courtroom where you never took the stand. The prosecution shouted, pointed, lied, but the jury looked around and saw receipts, not rants. And without a single word from you, the verdict came back clean. That silence broke them. Because it's one thing to lose to someone's arguments, but to lose to their quiet, that's humiliation they can't escape. They mocked your silence, but now they're terrified of it, because your quiet exposed them louder than your words ever could. You didn't have to say a thing. They showed the world exactly who they were, and that silence, chosen one, was the blade that cut their plan to pieces. Number 14, you became the plot twist that shattered their script. They wrote you as the villain, but the truth flipped the script and made them the clowns in their own story. That's the gut punch, chosen one. They thought they had the whole storyline figured out. You were supposed to be the troublemaker, the arrogant one, the shady character everyone should be wary of. They rehearsed this play in whispers, body language, and fake concern, convinced that the audience would eat it up. But the problem with their script was simple. It wasn't based on truth. And when truth finally walked in, it shredded the plot they worked so hard to stage. Now, imagine this like a movie. They spent all their energy setting you up as the villain, lining up scenes where your downfall was inevitable. But when the investigator stepped in, it was like the unexpected twist nobody saw coming. Instead of confirming their lies, the feedback painted a completely different picture. You weren't the storm, you were the calm. You weren't the chaos, you were the consistency. And just like that, the entire theater shifted. The audience they thought they controlled suddenly saw through the smoke. Their villain story crumbled in real time. Here's the fact that wrecked them. Repetition doesn't turn lies into truth. They banked on spreading their version enough times to make it stick. But when the investigation brought real people into the spotlight, their fiction collapsed under pressure. People they thought would add fuel ended up testifying with clarity, no, that's not who they are. They've always been solid. That kind of unexpected honesty hit harder than any defense you could have made yourself. And maybe you've asked, why did the narrative flip so fast? Because manipulation only works in shadows. The moment light hits it, the illusion shatters. They thought their whispers were strong enough to shape reality. But the truth had been building quietly for years in the way you carried yourself. When it was finally tested, it proved unshakable. Think of it like a chess match where they assumed they had you cornered. But the move they thought would checkmate you only revealed they were the ones trapped. Their supposed grand finale turned into the opening scene of their own exposure. And you, chosen one, became the plot twist they never wrote, the shift they never prepared for, the ending that left them scrambling. They thought you were a character in their story, but in reality, they were just background noise in yours. The real story is unfolding now, and it doesn't end with your downfall. It ends with their script in flames and your truth standing undefeated. So listen, chosen one, what your enemies planned as your downfall turned into your proof of strength. The investigation they thought would bury you only revealed how solid, consistent, and untouchable you really are. Let this remind you, when your life is lived in truth, no lie can stand against it. And if this message spoke to your spirit, press that like button if you haven't already. And if you're still not part of our family, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Stay strong, chosen one. The story isn't over, and your light is only getting brighter.